Hi, I'm Clyde Haberman. Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. I'll be filling in for Sam Roberts. We're taping this program on March 30th, 2 days before the state budget deadline, and when this program airs, this year's budget might be approved on time, but perhaps not. The most dramatic development in state negotiations was the announcement of a massive taxpayer subsidy to build a new football stadium in Buffalo, $850 million. Governor Hochul is a native of Western New York, and she's made it a personal priority to support the football team and its owners, Terry and Kim Pegula. But the announcement did give policymakers a scant 4 days to review the details. It's a classic political game, downstate versus upstate priorities. Another divisive proposal from the governor, alterations to the state's bail laws, has prompted an assemblywoman in Brooklyn, Latrice Walker, to go on a hunger strike. There's also breaking news about fast-tracking 3 casino licenses for New York City. Other issues at the forefront of budget negotiations include expanded health care for undocumented New Yorkers, a gas tax, a boost in pay for frontline healthcare workers, and issues related to climate change. Joining me today to discuss all this is Luis Ferré-Sadurní, Albany political reporter for The Times. He's joining us from Albany. And Eleanor Randolph, contributing writer for The Times, is here in the studio. Welcome to both of you. Luis, can I begin with the stadium in Buffalo? We're talking about $600 million in state money, $250 in money from Erie County, which is the county where Buffalo is, to build a stadium that's estimated at $1.4 billion for the Buffalo Bills, who I guess I should add is the only New York football team, actually, despite the fact that the 2 New Jersey teams used the name New York. I've written about subsidies for sports arenas and stadiums in the past when other politicians have proposed it. And I don't know of any study that suggests that these are economic development winners for the localities or for the states where they build. So why this time? Why are we getting this? It's a lot of money, obviously. And if I could just one more thing, when they say 1.4 billion, I've yet to see anybody come in at the number that's predicted. It's usually well over it. So.
Right. So the Buffalo Bills Stadium is one of the oldest in the nation, and the team owners said last year that they would not renew the lease. And after state officials and the team did an assessment, they came to the conclusion that it made more financial sense to build a new one than to do renovations. Then the question became, how much is the state going to pitch in? The Pegulas, wealthy New York-based, Western New York-based family, were seeking public funding. And then you have Governor Kathy Hochul, who's a Buffalo native, stepped in for former Governor Andrew Cuomo last year and is running for a full term this year. So it's an election year. She's an avid Bills fan. And since taking office, she said that was one of her #1 priorities. So the governor had been engaged in backroom negotiations with the team over the past few months, leading up to the state budget deadline, but no one really knew the details. There was an expectation that there might be a large taxpayer subsidy, and on Monday, the final price tag was unveiled, and not surprisingly, there was a lot of backlash from lawmakers, especially downstate lawmakers, who are saying that this amounts to a corporate welfare, corporate giveaway, and that any threat that the team might have left Buffalo if they hadn't received the tax subsidy was a bluff. But ultimately, this is one of Governor Kathy Hochul's top priorities. The governor has more leverage than lawmakers in state budget negotiations. So despite the outcry and outrage that it might have provoked in some state lawmakers, it is likely that this will ultimately end up passing, even if we don't know the full details of the deal yet.
Right. Brian Benjamin, the lieutenant governor, is being investigated by the federal authorities for questions of possible illegality involving financing of his campaign for city controller last year. I need to emphasize there's, no criminal action is being taken against the lieutenant governor, but Eleanor and Luis both, is he now formally a liability for Governor Hochul as we head into an election?
You want me to?
If you don't mind.
All right. Ooh. So, yeah, I don't think so. I mean, he's really not charged personally in these investigations, and he. I mean, if you look at it, it looks like some really sloppy work on his part, and it might be more than that. I don't know. You know, we haven't seen what the investigators come up with. I mean, his role is very important because he really helps the governor get votes in New York City. I mean, he's very popular. He's very popular in Harlem, where he helped fund some buildings there in Harlem. But I think ultimately, unless he is charged, it's just one more case of certain laziness, sleaziness, who knows what in Albany.
Lazy is not good, is it? I mean, lazy is understandable, perhaps sloppy, I can understand, but sleazy.
You don't like sleazy?
Well, it should be one of the 7 dwarfs, you know, it was Snow White, but.
Well, you know, the thing is, and I hope Louis enjoys covering Albany, because it is, I've always felt that in the case of Albany, you need to just pick the rock up and see what's underneath it, you know. And that's probably been true for over 100 years. Albany became the byword for a sort of corrupt state government. Unfortunately, the good government groups are trying to get a new ethics commission out of this budget, really. I don't think they can ever control themselves in Albany.
Luis, do you have a sense of what politicians are saying about Mr. Benjamin?
I think only time will tell. It's not entirely clear the scope of this investigation and whether it is focused entirely on Benjamin, or if this is just a thread that investigators stumbled into as they were investigating the situation with his straw donor. What is clear is that if Kathy Hochul wanted to get rid of him from the ticket, it would be almost impossible at this point. It would entail a very convoluted process. So for better or for worse, they're sort of running mates at this point. And obviously their political opponents have already used this to their advantage. Congressman Tom Suozzi, City Advocate Jumaane Williams have both attacked the governor for sort of this news around Brian Benjamin. So I think time will tell, and we'll see where this sort of goes, the investigation, that is.
It's perhaps a risky question because we'll be airing after there may well be a budget deal. Do we have a sense of whether the tweaks in the bail reform laws that the governor is seeking will be enacted, or is this something likely to be pushed off for a later time? It doesn't have to be part of the budget bill, necessarily.
Right. It is my sense that the governor is very much pursuing this in the state budget, and she wants to get it done in the state budget because it's where she has the best shot to get it through. Anything that she can't get done now will become even more difficult afterwards, and by then she'll be more in the throes of election season. So I think something will get done around bail reform. I think all three, the 2 chambers and the executive, are sort of trying to find common ground. I don't think the final version will be very close to what Governor Kathy Hochul initially proposed, but that's part of negotiating in Albany, right? You start maybe a little bit to one extreme, knowing that you can eventually get something in the middle. And as I mentioned, governors tend to have leverage over these negotiations. And I'll also add, there was a Siena poll this week which found that a lot of voters want lawmakers to change, make tweaks to bail reform. Whether bail reform is tied to crime or not that's another question. But in terms of the electoral politics, as Democrats are heading into primaries and a November where Republicans could make gains, this is something that could play well with voters in New York.
Well, rising crime rates do have a way of focusing political minds in terms of cracking down. And so, do you have a sense from the folks you speak to in Albany of whether
first of all, one of the things that's happening in Albany is that they're moving into this tunnel, and the negotiations are as secretive. Blair Horner from NYPIRG said it was the most secretive negotiation system that he'd seen in a very long time, and he's been up there for 40 years.
Well, he hasn't covered the Vatican. When they elect popes, it changes things a lot.
Well, all right. So, so you don't really know what's going to come out in this, what they're calling a timely budget, which may mean that it's not on time at all. You know, they voted on one part of the budget, but they've still got the big 8, to go. It might not be ready immediately, but it'll be sort of timely. And on bail reform, I think they're going to have to tinker with that, and mainly they're going to have to give the judges more leeway, and that's sort of the big thing that you hear people talking about. It's going to be very unpopular with some of those more progressive legislators, but that may be a necessity.
They may also find that their constituents, though, do like that.
Care about it, yeah.
Absolutely. Can I ask you, Eleanor, about the mayor, who is now given professional athletes, an exemption from the COVID restrictions that govern all of us? How unfair is this? Very, or just a little? Obviously, I'm telegraphing my view on this. I don't understand how he justifies this. Right?
I don't understand how he justifies it either. And you know what? The city employees, the ones that are out on the street, are out on the street. And but he does seem to react to that kind of thing. I bet he'll just roll that back as soon as possible.
Luis, a chunk of the $216 billion or so New York State budget, I can't even believe that figure, it's incredible, is financed by federal aid, a fair amount of which I suspect is going to dry up before long. Do we have a sense of how dire the situation is, or perhaps tax revenues rolling in better than expected and we ought to be okay? Do we have a read on that?
It really does depend on the type of decisions that lawmakers and the governor make this week. Kathy Hochul lucked out in that she inherited a state flush with cash. I think it was something like $23 billion from the federal government over 4 years. And that came at a time when there were dire warnings that tax receipts could have dried up because of the pandemic, but actually the state received better than expected tax revenue. So she lucked out in that sense, and the budget she unveiled was one that was relatively conservative compared to the one that Democrats in the legislature unveiled. She put aside about 15% of funds for reserves, what's called a rainy day fund. She allocated a lot of expenses to be one-time sort of expenses, not recurring expenses. So you could see that in the billions of dollars she wanted to allocate to give healthcare workers bonuses, for example. But the legislature came back with their own proposal a month later, and the one thing that was clear is that they wanted to go even further. They wanted to spend even more and go beyond what was already a record proposal for New York State's history. And so now they're hashing out their differences on spending, and it is likely, as with many of these things, that they'll meet somewhere in the middle.
Very quickly, we only have seconds left. The issue of mayoral control of the schools, that has to be renewed. Is it likely to be? And just a question of for how many years? And it may not happen this week, I assume, but then we only have seconds.
That remains up in the air. Kathy Hochul is on board with Eric Adams, and they want to renew it for another 4 years. But some lawmakers have concerns, and it could very well be done after the budget if it's not included.
All right,
this
we
week.
shall see, and we'll follow that. Thank you, Luis and Eleanor. Next up, Daniel Nigro looks back at 53 years with the FDNY. Welcome back. Daniel Nigro retired recently from the New York City Fire Department, where he was the commissioner for the last 8 years. In a career spanning a remarkable 53 years in the department, starting in 1969, his experience in the city is unmatched. From the arson fires of the 1970s on through the September 11th attacks, where Mr. Nigro was appointed chief of department after the then chief Peter Gansey died in the attacks. Mr. Nigro retired, but he was reappointed in 2014. He is one of the longest lasting members of the fire department, and now he joins me. Welcome, Mr. Nigro. Sadly, in your last weeks as commissioner, we had a terrible fire in the Bronx in which 17 people were killed, including 8 children who died. Last year had a 16% rise in the number of, that would be 2021, in the number of fire deaths from 63 to 73. Now, we're obviously far away from the worst years. When you, in your first full year, in 1970, we had 310 deaths, but we're also far above the record low in 2016, which I think was 46 deaths. Should we be worried, or is it just ebb and flow of that's just inevitable?
Yeah, I think you hit it right there. It is an ebb and flow. It's statistically, probably for 16 years now, we've been below 100, and the numbers, 48 was incredibly a good year for us in the city. Still way too many, and when you look at the causes, they just go on and on to be the same things. Smoking as a cause has gone down because fewer people smoke. Right. Electrical fires considerably high. This fire in the Bronx, this tragic fire, was started by a space heater. They do cause many fires.
Are some of the modern devices that we all have, or most of us have, a problem? Lithium batteries that explode and the like. So are we creating fire hazards with our advanced products?
Well, I think you're going to see these lithium bikes, which have caused 3 deaths last year, continue to be a problem. People take them, I mean, naturally take them into their homes. New York is not a place where people have outdoor areas where they can recharge them. So they find their way into apartments and homes. The batteries, especially aftermarket batteries, overheat, and they've caused numerous fires. So this is something the department is very well aware of.
Has firefighting appreciably changed across the half century that you've been involved in it? I mean, in the end, it's still pouring water on flames, obviously, but are there major technical improvements for the average citizen that would affect how they perceive how you guys do your job?
A little of each. You know, firefighting, my father before me was in the fire department starting in the 1940s.
For more than 30 years, right?
He was.
Yeah.
And he could see modern firefighting and know exactly what's going on. We still put ladders up, we still stretch hose. It's still a lot of people carrying heavy weight and doing that. But of course our equipment is better, our protective equipment is much better, our communications is better. The tools that we use are far advanced, whether it's for forcing doors, for working at auto extrication. So many of the tools have improved since I started. But really the basics of firefighting is brave men and women doing extremely physical work.
A full generation has been born and come of age since the September 11th attacks. It's 21 years almost ago. How much to the younger folks in the department does 9/11 weigh on them? To what degree? How much does it weigh on you? I mean, I assume it would be different. You were there. They weren't. Is that, in effect, ancient history for the younger members of the department, or is it something they live with?
You know, I think looking back, I was born in 1948, so Pearl Harbor wasn't too far before that. Yeah. But to me, it was history. It wasn't something I personally experienced. Sure. I knew about it. I think the same thing for our young folks. They learn about it in the academy. It's a big part of the fire department's legacy now. For me, it's an everyday piece of my life that will never change. But our young members, more than the average young people of that age, carry it with them. I think people live the present for the most part.
That's normal and actually desirable, I would imagine. I should add, I meant to mention, because a lot of people may not remember that 343 members of the department were killed that day. So
it was a number I know we all remember Mayor Giuliani saying it's unimaginable number of people we lost in the department. Before that, we had lost 12 people in October of 1966 on 23rd Street,
I covered that fire.
and that was the largest number ever.
Yeah,
in the
that was
history.
12.
So it went from 12 to 343. It's quite a jump.
Yeah, to say the least. Were there important lessons learned and action taken? One part of the problem that day was there really was not good communication between the police and the fire department. I think a lot of cops who were in helicopters above could see that those buildings were beginning to weaken and potentially crumble. Lord knows that there's a traditional rivalry between the two departments. Have we at least conquered that communications aspect of it?
Well, that's certainly something that's been solved. Major fires today, a fire chief actually is taken up in a police helicopter and has direct communication. We share some radio frequencies that we can communicate with one another. So that was a major takeaway from 9/11, that had to improve, and it certainly has improved.
The whole question of the makeup of the department is something that gets a lot of attention periodically, both in terms of racial composition and gender composition. Let me start with gender. I'm frankly not even sure what percentage of the firefighting units are women, and can that be significantly increased? Is there not just a physical component to this that needs to be accepted and dealt with reality? You guys, that's a lot of equipment you tote around.
It's a difficult physical job for men and women,
Yeah.
but I've said many times there are thousands of women in our city physically capable of doing this job, and we try very hard to recruit them. It's still not seen by most young women as a potential career for them.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to do a better job in getting into them at a young age. And I think we need to reach a tipping point, which we're not at yet, where these young women see at every operation that the fire department is at, women as part of the team. Now they do see it in our EMS component, where there's
Right.
perhaps 1,000
The
women,
emergency services.
and they're part of for the fire department. But in the firefighting side, there's still we've just reached over 100 for the first time in our history
Of women?
of women. But that's out of almost
11,000?
11,000
Yeah.
people in the
Yeah, that's
department. So
pretty low.
what a small
Wow.
percentage it is.
And in terms of the ethnic component of the department, once upon it, when I was a young reporter, the department had to be easily roughly 95% white, and a lot of legacy hires, and that I know has changed. But let me ask what is perhaps not a popular question of how important is it really? It's one thing with the police department where there's an interaction with the populace in which there's a racial component that is impossible to ignore. I have yet to hear a tale of a firefighter saying, I'm not going into that building because there are people of a certain ethnic group or racial group that I don't like. Again, how important is this in terms of the actual firefighting component, which is what you guys do?
I mean, certainly there are countries around the world that have fire departments that are made up of, because the country is entirely white,
Right.
and they put out fires. So that's really not the issue. I think the issue is twofold, and I find it all over in every industry, in every business, that you need a variety of people to solve problems in a complex society that we have. The other issue is, I personally consider it the greatest job on earth. I've said that many times, and I think we failed at one point to give everyone in our city the opportunity to have this great job. So over the almost 8 years that I served as commissioner, we made every effort to go out there and give people that opportunity, and they've taken it. So our percentage has gone, from you say 5, it might have been 7, to over 25%, and it continues to go up, and not where it should be yet, but it certainly will be and should be, because everyone deserves a chance. And for some reason, a certain segment of our society was not given that chance.
Fair enough. Can I ask what your next act is? You mentioned off here that you're treading in my field. You're writing a bit. I don't know if that's fair. I don't fight fires. Why are you? No, all kidding aside. What is it?
Well,
autobiography?
I thought possibly some of the lessons I've learned since I started in '69 and came back as commissioner about leadership, about taking on tasks that may be considered difficult to others and yet fulfilling. There's a lessons learned there, and I'm trying to write a book. I'm not a very good writer, but we'll see how it goes. I think I may do a little consulting and public speaking, and spend more time with my children and grandchildren and wife.
Well, all sounds good. So good luck with the book, and I would look forward to reading it. And you have a title yet?
The working title is Ultimate Responsibility.
There you go. Good title. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Nigro. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Clyde Haberman.